Thank you for joining me and welcome as we have a look at strange disappearances in national parks worldwide. The term missing 411 means missing information. Actually, it has its origins as a computer term that refers to data that cannot be found or a corrupted link, missing information. It is certainly fitting for the state of these individuals who vanished. Missing people in the USA or across the world are an unfortunate but regular occurrence. In fact, with as many as 90,000 people declared legally missing in America at any given time, it is hard to ignore the issue. However, stories of missing 411 victims do not take place in only rural areas. David Pilates, an investigator who spent 20 years of his life as a police officer, has uncovered a number of puzzling trends. Thousands of unsolved missing persons cases are occurring in national parks and forests in the US and around the world, and one researcher has been feverishly looking into the mystery. David Pilates, former law enforcement officer and current private investigator, has published many books detailing these disturbing disappearances, leaving others to speculate about the cause. Missing 411 cases are a classification of missing person cases that fit a number of criteria. The disappearances occurred in a national park, rural area or large reserve of public land. Urban disappearances that don't make any sense. Missing people later found in water but they didn't drown, where there's no water in their lungs. Exceptionally odd circumstances surrounding the disappearances. Mental illness or voluntary disappearance does not appear to be the cause. No sign of animal predation, meaning in animal behaviour it is the pursuit of capture and killing for food, signs of a struggle, etc. The cause of death cannot be determined, but it's written off as accident or animal attacks. When found, it is sometimes in areas that have already been searched. Often the area has been searched more than once, or found in areas that seem impossible for them to get to. Search dogs have difficulty locating a scent, or if they do find a scent, sometimes it just stops. But the missing person isn't there. If they do locate a scent and are able to follow it, they can chase the scent for miles, sometimes up steep mountains where the searchers need climbing equipment to follow the dogs. Footprints often lead to nowhere, meaning the footprints, if found, just stop suddenly, as if they were lifted up into the air. Every year, thousands of people go missing. Many of these cases are solved, or at least the cause can be reasonably ascertained. Strangers kidnap kids for ransom, or worse, estranged parents kidnap their own children from former spouses, and crimes lead to disappearances of clearly criminal nature. Then there are cases that are truly inexplicable, like the ones detailed in Pilates' book Missing 411, and the books published since. These cases differ in strange ways from other missing persons cases. They are happening in remote areas of national parks, monuments and forests, and federal agencies are not keeping track or sharing information. The vast majority of these strange disappearances occurred on clearly marked and popular hiking trails. Additionally, victims are often proficient outdoorsmen and women, hikers and hunters who know their backwoods well. Pilates has dedicated nearly a decade of his life to the research of missing 411 cases and has written a series of books on the subject. However, he has never suggested a cause. Although there are both national and even international examples of far older cases, David Pilates' efforts to synthesize records apply to recent history. His work focuses on an analysis of case files acquired through the Freedom of Information Act. Subsequently, with his methodical compilation of data, he identifies trends. One of the most startling of these is the mystery of 411 disappearance hotspots. Whether it's the nature of the terrain or something else, there seem to be concentrations of disappearances in certain areas. There are a number of these cluster spots across the globe. However, one of the most prevalent and recurring seems to be the Yosemite National Park in California. All of the cases that are meticulously documented in the books have happened in 52 clearly defined geographic clusters. The Rocky Mountains and Sierra Pacific Range are two areas where cases are concentrated. Colorado, Michigan, Georgia and Arkansas are other hotspots. Other countries are also involved, with many cases documented in Canada, Europe and Australia. High altitude locations, berry patches, swamps and boulder-strewn landscapes are typical locations where people are going missing. Many of the victims are physically fit, well equipped with outdoor gear and even hunting weapons, and are familiar with the area from which they disappear. A large number of cases involve people who vanish suddenly while hiking or camping with family and friends. A large percentage of victims whose bodies are found are missing their shoes and socks, even though they went missing in cold weather where being shoeless could be a death sentence in itself. The shoes are seldom found. The majority of victims are male, mentally handicapped in some way, or to the other extreme in the genius intellectual range. Bodies are found at higher elevations than where they were last seen alive, defying explanation as to how they could have gotten to such an inaccessible place. In one case, a physician went hiking to a winter cabin with friends. They had all been there before and were in excellent physical condition and equipped with new snow gear. The missing man vanished after going ahead on the trail a short distance and was then found 2 weeks later miles away, hundreds of feet higher in elevation than when he was last seen, in a steep ravine with all his snow gear and emergency equipment and provisions unused and his shoes nowhere to be found. In another case, a girl went on a horseback camping trip to a remote lake in Yosemite National Park with a large group of others, including her father. Shortly after arriving, the others watched as she walked a short distance away into a small patch of trees and then suddenly vanished. Search and rescue teams came in quickly to search for her, but even bloodhounds could not find a trace. In the United States National Park system alone, there are more than 84 million acres, 35 million hectares of preserved woods, deserts, mountains and other wilderness. So it's no surprise that in the past 100 years there have been a number of cases of hikers going missing. Many of those who vanished were young children and inexperienced hikers, but some were healthy and seasoned outdoors people. But is there more to these disappearances than just kids wandering off or hikers becoming disoriented? Pilates says he can rule out some causes. He believes it is not serial killers and he carefully excludes any case that could have a simple explanation, like suicide or accidental drowning. Others are suggesting causes ranging from Bigfoot abductions to aliens to wild men living secretly in the forests, consuming human flesh. Many people who have followed up on Pilates' research suspect that a Bigfoot or similar cryptoid creature is abducting humans in the wilderness, perhaps as a food source. While the bodies that are recovered are not eaten or dismembered, the cause of death cannot usually be determined during an autopsy, leaving some wondering if these creatures live on fear itself. Bigfoot and other cryptids from Appalachian mythology have come into the equation a number of times. Many of these missing 411 cases demonstrate strange instances. Interestingly, UFO sightings often correlate with these hotspots, sometimes even around the same time that someone has gone missing. Theorists also propose that a serial killer or a cult sect that hunts humans may be on the prowl. Some speculate this may be a part of some dark satanic ritual. Fringe theorists have also viewed the institutional apathy with suspicion. They propose that the missing 411 disappearances could be the result of a shadowy government program, with more people becoming aware of some of the government's irresponsible activities at the cost of citizens, such as MKUltra. Increasing numbers of private individuals and authors are taking an interest in these disturbing vanishing person cases. Pilates and other retired law enforcement and search and rescue personnel have created a website where case reports, maps and victims' names are posted and regularly updated. There are a string of cold cases leaving unanswered questions about those who were never found. David Paulides released several books and a couple of documentaries on this subject titled Missing 411. This series chronicles many disappearances that Paulides investigated throughout his career, all of which took place in national parks and none offering any plausible explanation. Even more disturbing than the many cases already documented is the fact that since publication of the Missing 411 book in 2012, there has been an increase in the numbers of these vanishing person cases. Some wonder if whoever or whatever is responsible for abducting these people is watching and responding as people get closer to solving the mystery. What would cause someone to seemingly vanish into thin air? There are two approaches people take to explaining these mysterious disappearances: earthly and supernatural. Most hiking experts would say that these missing hikers made common mistakes, like taking on more than they could handle or failing to time their turn back to beat the sunset. However, some disappearances have become focus for urban legends, online message boards and non-fiction books. In fact, David Paulides thinks something more intriguing is afoot. His books examine more than 1,100 cases of people who mysteriously vanished in the United States national parks. The National Park Service doesn't collect data on how many visitors disappear within the vast expanses of these parks. The National Park Service doesn't collect data on how many visitors disappear within the vast expanses of these national parks. Indeed, most people turn up on their own accord a few days later. In 2020, Paulides estimated that there had been over 1,600 unexplained disappearances in North America. Let's be honest, although it might be fun to imagine monsters or something spookier, no proof for any supernatural disappearance has ever been provided. But there have definitely been some mysterious disappearances, both in the United States and abroad, in formal, federal government-run national parks, as well as in related spaces like national forests, recreation areas, state parks, and more. Here are some of the most fascinating cases to date, starting in the early 20th century. Bessie and Glenn Hyde were honeymooning in northern Arizona at the Grand Canyon when they vanished. They were travelling down the Colorado River by scow in October 1928 and planned to boat through the Grand Canyon. Bessie would have been the first woman ever to do so successfully. Glenn had run tough rivers before, but Bessie was a boating newbie. The couple ran across other boaters a few weeks before their disappearance, who said they got the feeling that Bessie wanted to turn back, but Glenn was pushing her on. If they completed the trip successfully, they could go on a paid lecture tour, so this trip was more than just fun, there was money at stake. Cut to several months later, the Hyde's boat was discovered that winter, seemingly undisturbed. It was upright and full of supplies, but the couple was gone. There are many theories about what happened to the Hydes. Did they disembark and try a too difficult side hike? Did they have an argument that turned violent? Or were they abducted? There are conflicting reports about what happened to the Hydes, and more than one Bessie Hyde sighting in the years that followed. 4-year-old Alfred Beilharz was the first recorded drowning in Colorado's Rocky Mountain National Park, though whether Alfred actually drowned is controversial. He was camping in the park with his family over the July 4 weekend when he disappeared, near the Roaring and Fall rivers. Alfred had gone with his dad to bathe in the river, and from there he decided to join two family friends at a spot about 500 feet, 150 metres upstream, of where he and his father entered the river. When everyone returned to camp, they realised that Alfred was missing. A search began immediately, expanding to more than 100 civilian conservation corps members within 45 minutes, but there was barely any sign of Alfred anywhere. A day later, after he disappeared, a couple hiking about 6 miles away from Alfred's campsite reported seeing a boy who looked like Alfred sitting in an area called the Devil's Nest. By the time the authorities arrived, though, the boy was gone. The search went on for 10 days and included 150 men, plus bloodhounds, though the size of the search party had dwindled to a dozen by the end of the 8th day. Park rangers chalked his disappearance up to drowning. 8-year-old Catherine Van Alst disappeared from Devil's Den State Park near Arkansas Ozark National Forest, where she and her family were camping. Van Alst apparently was playing with her brother when she wandered off and got lost, and couldn't find her way back. What makes her disappearance remarkable is that when she was found after 6 days wandering the woods, she was eerily calm. University of Arkansas student Porter Chadwick was part of the search party that found Van Alst. He told the Pittsburgh Press that when he found her, she walked stoically out of a cave and just said, "Here I am." She had survived on berries and spent nights sleeping in caves. Many other hikers have gotten lost in that part of the Ozarks and had not been as lucky as Van Alst. There's an area in Green Mountain National Forest near Gladstoneberry Mountain and Vermont's Long Trail that believers in the paranormal call the Bennington Triangle. This area got this name because of a handful of mysterious disappearances which occurred between 1945 and 1950. Although many more have been recorded over the years, paranormal author Joseph A. Citro coined the term because of the supposedly supernatural circumstances surrounding these vanishings. Paula Weldon was the second person to go missing in that area of Green Mountain National Forest during this period. 18-year-old Weldon was a college student who set out on the Long Trail in December 1946. She was dressed for walking and not a long hike, wearing jeans, a coat and sneakers. Her attire implied that she planned to return before dark, when temperatures were supposed to dip below freezing. Weldon told her roommate that she was taking a long walk and she never returned. Several people spotted her as she hitchhiked her way to the trail and walked to the trailhead. When Weldon didn't come back by dark, her roommate let the school know and the search began. Classes were suspended so students could help with the search. The process was disorganized at first until Weldon's father called in favors from police in 2 surrounding states. Unfortunately, the search didn't pan out, and frustrated family and friends had their own theories about what happened to her. Did Weldon run off with a boyfriend? Was she abducted? Did she commit suicide, or did she die of exposure because of her inappropriate attire? No one has discovered her body, so her disappearance remains a mystery. There's a rumour that this area of the Long Trail is home to a creature called the Bennington Monster. Could this Sasquatch-like animal have anything to do with the disappearance? One positive outcome of the case was that the lack of organisation in the search for Paul Weldon led to the creation of the Vermont State Police, which is responsible for all wilderness search and rescue missions in the state. 6-year-old Larry Jeffrey disappeared near the peak of 12,000-foot Mount Charleston in Humboldt National Forest, just a short drive from Las Vegas. The search began immediately after the boy wandered away from his brothers, and within days the National Guard and a team of bloodhounds had joined the search. In a TV interview, David Paulides told reporter George Knapp that there were no predators afoot that day, and since the area they were in was pretty secluded, it's easy to rule out an abduction by car. This boy just walked into oblivion, Paulides says. When Jeffrey disappeared, he was wearing light clothing and authorities were doubtful that he could survive the cold temperatures at night. Searchers found and lost the trail a few times, and that they discovered evidence that the boy had been eating insects and forage berries along the way. Overall, around 1,000 people searched for 16 days but never found him. 6-year-old Dennis Martin was on a camping trip near the Tennessee-North Carolina state line with his family in the summer of 1969. It was an annual Father's Day tradition. All of the men in the Martin family headed to Smoky Mountain National Park to camp and hike. Dennis and his brothers had planned a prank on the adults. They were going to hide separately in the bush and jump out on different sides of the campsite to scare them. It was a typical joke that should have ended with some startled shouts and then a lot of laughter. The laughter ended quickly, though, when they realised that Dennis was missing. Family, park rangers and other hikers spread out to search for Dennis almost immediately, but he was nowhere to be found. That evening there was heavy rainfall, which is bad news when you're trying to track a missing little boy. The search for Martin became the largest in National Park Service history. One of the people searching was Park Ranger Dwight McCarter, who had successfully tracked down hundreds of missing persons, including young children. McCarter was a seasoned tracker and he was struck by the complete lack of any sorts of tracks. Dennis seemed to have disappeared completely, leaving no trace at all. His disappearance is still a mystery. One possible lead that searchers didn't follow was a report from another family the evening that the boy went missing. The Key family allegedly heard a scream and then saw a bear man with something slung over its shoulder that looked like it could be a small child. This was 1 hour after the time of Dennis Martin going missing. The Key family claimed to see a bear in the same area. However, the creature's furry appearance was the only thing likening it to a bear, as the family described the creature ducking and weaving around trees and running like a human, while seeming to carry a child over its shoulder. Again, this testimony was never brought into evidence by the police, and the connection between the two incidents were only made later by Pilates while researching for missing 411. To this day, no concrete conclusions have been given for this case, and the rest of the Martin family remains bewildered. We'll never know whether this was related to the Martins' disappearance. Dennis's story is a parental nightmare. Little evidence was found to support any plausible explanation for the boy's disappearance, save for a set of children's footprints leading to a stream, believed by some police officers to be Dennis's. However, the footprints were dismissed as evidence as there were investigators in the area when they were found, although no children were with them at the time. Because of this, many considered Dennis's investigation to be a failure, and even though this could be a reasonable explanation for how he disappeared, by falling into the lake, there are no concrete answers. Besides the footprints, the claim by the Key family was largely dismissed by police. Douglas Legg and some of his family were heading out for a hike in the Adirondack Forest Preserve, Santanoni Preserve, when his uncle spotted poison ivy and told Legg to put long pants on to protect himself. The family's cabin was short, straight shot from where they were, but 8-year-old Legg never returned. Unlike a lot of the kids who have gone missing in national parks, Legg was very familiar with these woods. His family owned the cabin where they were staying and described Legg as a mini woodsman because they all hiked together there so often. Legg's disappearance sparked one of the southern Adirondacks' largest search and rescue missions, with more than 600 people searching the woods, but like Martin, Legg left no trail. Unlike in the Martin case, though, rescuers used dogs in their search. Some accounts describe dogs following Legg's scent over a 30-mile, 48-kilometre trail through difficult terrain. How could a young child have travelled alone for such a distance? Some searchers reported seeing bear-like tracks near the site. While black bears do drag their prey to cover, dragging someone 30 miles over difficult terrain seems unusual. The family became desperate and began suspecting each other and even their friends of abducting Legg. But the police were certain that the mini woodsman had simply gotten lost. He was never found. According to Peninsula Daily News, Olympic National Park in northern Washington state has a feature that's not as majestic as its mountain views. At least 4 hikers have mysteriously disappeared from the area in the last 25 years, one of whom was 73-year-old John Devine. In 1997, Devine planned to hike into the park from Mount Baldy. The trail is a tough 24 miles, and though Devine was elderly, he was also an experienced long-distance hiker. Devine was camping with his friend, Greg Bolzer. They split up on the day that Devine went missing. Bolzer went off to hunt while Devine took off on a day hike. Devine never returned. The fruitless search for Devine lasted a full week until a rescue helicopter crash killed 3 people and injured 5 others. By that time, weather conditions had deteriorated, making the chances of finding Devine slim. Friends and family said that Devine wouldn't want to put people in danger on his behalf, and the search was called off. The search helicopter crash is as mysterious as Devine's disappearance. Before takeoff, the pilot used a hand signal indicating he was going to wait 5 minutes for conditions to improve before attempting it. A moment later, the helicopter departed vertically without warning and crashed into the side of the mountain. At 8 a.m. on July Day in 2004, David Gonzalez asked his mother if he could have the car keys. There was a box of cookies in the car and the 9-year-old wanted a treat. The car was only 50 yards, 46 metres away, and his mother watched him as he walked to the parking lot near their Big Bear Lake campsite in Northern California's San Bernardino National Forest. She turned her back for a second, and when she looked around again, Gonzalez was gone. His mother reported that she heard no sound at all when her back was turned, although she did see a beige truck speeding out of the campground around the time her son went missing. Since there were no signs of abduction, authorities did not pursue that lead. The cookies that Gonzalez went to get were still in the family's locked van, so he never made it to the car. Rescue teams in San Bernardino County scoured the woods for Gonzalez. They found no signs of the struggle or of the boy. The search went on for 9 days, but rescuers never found him alive. Almost a year later, hikers stumbled upon a boy's remains about a mile from his family's campsite. Authorities initially chalked this up to a mountain lion attack, but how could a mountain lion have silently dragged a 9-year-old boy a mile without leaving any blood or signs of a struggle? The autopsy determined that any marks made to the child's remains were done by scavenging animals. Prabdeep Srawn was a 25-year-old Canadian Army reservist who disappeared from Australia's Kosciuszko National Park. Located in the southeastern state of New South Wales, Srawn was studying abroad in Australia in May 2013 when he decided to take a 17-mile, 2,700-kilometre road trip from the Gold Coast to Melbourne. Srawn rented a van, drove to the park's Charlotte's Pass in the Snowy Mountains, and no one has seen him since. The search for Srawn began when the rental company discovered that the van wasn't returned. Srawn hadn't told anyone what route or side hikes he was planning, and the search may have started days or even a week after he went missing, since it was the rental company that first reported the disappearance. Searchers figured out his hike plans by looking at the search history on a laptop they recovered from his van. Srawn's family hired private searchers after Australian authorities called off their search after only 2 weeks. The investigators used tower data from Srawn's phone and trained dogs to track his trail to a treacherous area called the Western Fall Wilderness. Just 1 day before his van was due back to the rental agency, Srawn embarked on a difficult and time-consuming hike in snowy weather. Why would a trained military reservist make a choice like that? Despite a private search that went on for over a year, Srawn's body was never recovered. Another case that raises eyebrows is that of 2-year-old Keith Parkins, who disappeared while visiting his grandfather's ranch in the middle of Ritter, Oregon, by Umatilla National Forest. His disappearance launched a full investigation by local authorities, which led to him being found 12 miles away from the ranch and lying unconscious in the snow. As a toddler, Keith had no way of moving this far on his own and without warm clothing. It's surprising that he even survived. Years later, as an adult, Parkins was interviewed for Missing 411 and claims to have no recollection of the event. The case leaves many questions that remain unanswered, and many are still fascinated by it. No one has figured out how a young child could have moved such a far distance in the middle of the night through such adversity, and some wonder if a person or creature was responsible for moving him. Like these, there are many other cases that have been documented similarly in national parks. The mystery of what exactly happened to 22-year-old Jacob Gray will likely never be solved. The athletic young man rode his mountain bike into a rainstorm in Olympic National Park in Washington in April 2017 and was never seen alive again. His bike and gear were found on the side of the trail, but Gray was nowhere to be found. This kicked off a search, largely championed by his father, Randy, who actually sold his house and closed his contracting business so that he could fully devote his time to searching for his son. Randy spent months doing that, all while theorising about what could have happened to his child. He considered hypothermia, accidental drowning, an accident, and so on. He also worried that the burgeoning mental health issues had gotten the best of him. In August of the same year, he got the phone call that a group of researchers had found Jacob's remains and supplies higher on the mountain than anyone had expected. The likely cause of death was hypothermia. A 27-year-old Irishman visiting Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming has been missing since June 2021. The last known sighting of Dublin native Cyan McLaughlin pinpoints him heading in direction of Taggart Lake. This is located on an 8-mile, 12-kilometre trail that is very difficult in nature. When he didn't show up to work, he was reported missing. He held dual US-Irish citizenship. His car was found nearby and kicked off a search that formally ended 2 weeks later. 45 helicopter searches and other high-tech tools have yet to reveal any information about his whereabouts. His family in the US National Park Service has since put out a poster with photo and details as well as a hashtag Find Cyan to keep him top of mind for visitors to the area. The disappearance is extra puzzling as his uncle described that particular trailhead as his favourite. Another hiker reported seeing McLaughlin without a backpack, so it appeared he had just gone out for a walk. Along with the phenomena of the national parks have come rumours about the existence of skinwalkers. These creatures are described to be horrifying, with elongated features that go along with their tall and extremely skinny nature. These humanoid figures are dangerous and can mimic or disguise themselves as other things, much like the account from one person. She says that while visiting her in-laws in New Hampshire, she had a possible skinwalker encounter after hearing her daughter calling her name outside. When she went to check on her daughter, though, she was and had been sound asleep. These creatures are not only the root of many nightmares, but are also thought to be a possible explanation as to why so many people go missing in the wilderness. It seems that out of nowhere these people are whisked away, leaving without a trace. While there are many people who believe that these humanoids explain the unexplainable, there are others who do not buy it. Regardless, something out there is responsible for the countless disappearances in the national parks. The suspicious nature of the issue, in combination with the trends that David Paulides documents, are beyond a mystery. Paulides noted that many of these instances occur near bodies of water around granite boulders. Additionally, there are strangely small distances of separation between the victims. This was the case for Stacey Arias' case and Ronald Kirk. Both were also adept outdoor people. In Stacey Arias' case, she went only a short distance from the party she was riding with. She was also near a body of water, and the area around the cabin was littered with large granite boulders. There are also cases of missing time. People reappearing days, weeks, months, or years later, with no idea of where they've been or how long they were gone. If only one or two clusters existed, one could ascribe the vanishings to the work of a serial killer. Regardless of these fringe ideas, what is substantial are a number of instances members of the National Park Services have been denied reasonable requests for these case files, even wanting to charge David Paulides $1.4 million for a Freedom of Information document. Paulides also explores instances of other governmental agencies arriving at these sites and conducting their own confidential investigations. In one example, both the FBI and National Guard engaged in a search for a missing child in 2013. A forest ranger that witnessed the exchange described it as two entirely different operations that seemed to have their own agendas. There were active efforts to distance themselves from each other, the FBI and the National Guard, US National Park Service, and even the parents of the missing kid. But 35 clusters, with some cases going back to the late 19th century, defy any conventional explanation. That leaves X-Files style causes like alien abductions, Bigfoot or interdimensional portals. The imagination can just run rampant. The government may or may not know more than it is revealing. Of course, the NPS, the National Park Service, makes a lot of money on admission fees to national parks. If more people became aware that young people are vanishing without a trace at national parks, they might make other vacation plans. In any case, the mystery cries out for more extensive investigation than one author can undertake. Something happened to these missing people, and the reason needs to be uncovered. These stories are only the tip of the iceberg and serve as a window into a few missing 411 cases. The sad reality is that there is a growing number of mysterious disappearances in natural settings. Although Pilates' work has been scrutinised, and some critics say that the number of unsolved cases is not statistically significant, Pilates has contributed immeasurably to the categorisation of the issue and the growth of it in the public consciousness. One can hope that the work of many, from volunteer searchers to content creators, can answer the question. What happened to these people? Why so often is it difficult to determine a cause of death if a body is even found? Missing 411 is a contentious subject with a very human face. Ultimately, only an answer could quell the public's curiosity and give the relatives and friends of the victims the closure they so surely deserve. To add to this information, 60% of state forests in the US are privately owned. 30% is owned by federal government, 10% owned by state and local governments. Altogether, national parks and the Defence Department own 55 million acres. Yellowstone was the first national park in 1872 after an exploration in 1870. The US Army managed it from 1886 to 1918. They restricted the deepest areas in the forest, using conservation as a means to do this. National Park Services was signed in to manage these areas in 1916. The National Park Service was to promote and regulate federal areas, conserve scenery and wildlife for the enjoyment of the parks for future generations. Now it punishes people more than protecting them. In the 1930s, over a 30-year period, National Park Services violated their mandate of preservation, shooting animals. Why did they do this? Military did not deny using these areas for bunkers, weapons storage, bases, and more. Would they be experimenting with genetically modified animals? Is that a possibility? Thank you for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think down below.